Hello everyone, this video is intended as a brief overview of the cardiovascular block. And in this block it'll have a pretty typical layout as far as blocks go, including a mission briefing and debrief, otherwise known as a tutorial, and that will include an inspirational video, small group discussions, and a debrief for the foundation block, including feedback about the virtual mission. This is the text of the introduction on Canvas. So to summarize, this is a 4-week mission looking at what happens to the cardiovascular system in space. Following the foundation block, it's the first of our physiology-based blocks. Starts in the week commencing 20th of March and concludes in the week commencing 24th of April. And the reason that it's so spread out is that there's a 2-week break in the middle of the block for the intersession week and the midterm break. For this mission, there's only one spacewalk, and you'll be able to work through the recommended materials at your own pace when it suits you. We have Dr. Mark Malin, who will be joining us on Monday the 27th of March for a Meet an Expert session related to cardiovascular health in space. He spoke for us last year and he's a dear colleague and friend of mine, so I'm sure he will have a fantastic presentation for us, and I can guarantee you that you will learn some things that you'll probably not hear anywhere else in the medical course, so it's going to have broader application than just space health. It's also possible that we might end up with 1 or 2 more Meet an Expert sessions during this block, as I'm currently talking to the guest speakers for the respiratory and gastrointestinal blocks, and if their preferred dates fall within this block, we will schedule them during this block, and that will mean that you will have breaks in the respiratory block and gastrointestinal block where we would otherwise have had a Meet an Expert session. So you won't end up with any more sessions than scheduled overall. It's just a question of where we fit them into the timetable. And then there's the reminder that you can watch a brief video overview, which is what you're watching right now, and the intention is that there'll be one of those for every block for the remainder of the year. And this is the remainder of the text in the introduction. So typically the introductions will have some information about all the key aspects of that particular block, and the remaining information here talks about the LEGO Education Build to Launch module, which starts in this block, the preparation that you need to do for the tutorial, including the allocations for the recap of the foundation block, and just some suggestions about what you should be thinking of in relation to your assessments for the year. With the to-do list, the 2 things which are scheduled at the moment are the mission briefing and debrief in the first week of the block, and the Meet an Expert session scheduled in the second week of the block. But as mentioned, there may be further Meet an Expert sessions, so please keep an eye on Canvas, and we will certainly provide details about future speakers once that information is available. And if you have a look at the tiles for the block, you will see that there's the tile for the spacewalk, the extravehicular activities. There's also the first module of the LEGO Build to Launch program, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and spin-offs. So just to remind you that learning about spin-offs is an integral part of the course and also relevant for your final assignment for the year. And if we just finish going through the home page, we have an inspiration section which has some wonderful Mars Explorer posters which come from NASA, and you can download those if you would like to do so. And also just to remind you about the extension tab, which has a list of all sorts of other wonderful resources related to aerospace medicine and space medicine. Moving on to the spacewalk overview. This has the typical tab layout for a spacewalk with Start Here, Spacewalk Aims, otherwise known as Learning Objectives, Explore, which is your recommended learning resources, Review, reflecting on what you've learnt, Discussing, having the opportunity to think about a few questions and interact with each other on Padlet, and then a list of optional extra resources. With the learning outcomes, there are quite a few for this block, and that reflects the complexity of what happens to the cardiovascular system in space. So the idea is that as you work through the recommended learning resources, that you will gain at least a basic understanding of all of these issues. And that leads us into the Explore tab, which has these recommended learning resources. The first one is hydrostatic pressure, gravity, and baroreceptors. And that's coming back to that point about how gravity is so important for life here in Earth, and gravity is also essential for hydrostatic pressure. There's essentially no hydrostatic pressure in space. So it's really important to appreciate how all this changes when we go into space, and how this also affects how our baroreceptors sense things in space. Then there's an accordion on the cardiovascular system in space, an overview of that. The third one is called Puffy Face and Bird Legs, looking at fluid shifts in microgravity. So astronauts end up with a fluid shift towards the torso and head, so they get a relatively puffy face, and their legs get a little bit thinner, hence bird legs. Cardiac arrhythmias in space, obviously that could be a mission critical threat, so it's important to know a little bit about those. Next, how blood components such as red cells and white cells change in space and the implications of that. Blood flow and venous thrombosis, that's another really interesting topic, and there was actually a blood clot found in the neck of an astronaut, an incidental finding, and so that had to be treated in space, which was a really interesting exercise for all involved. It had a happy outcome, but it just shows how space can throw you curveballs that you might not necessarily be aware of. There have been quite a few research studies related to the cardiovascular system and spaceflight, so we'll delve into those a bit. And then finally looking at orthostatic hypotension and countermeasures. So as a result of those fluid shifts and other factors, astronauts can have a little bit of a tendency to faint when they come back to Earth and they feel the influence of gravity again. So lots of clever people have been thinking about ways to potentially combat that. So there's some material relating to that. There are some review questions, and they include both Earth physiology and space physiology, so it should be a useful little revision task for you. And then the discussion Padlet, we have some questions relating particularly to cardiovascular health in space, and it'll be the same for each block. There'll usually be 3 points which are related to that block, and then 3 general discussion points. So we really do encourage you to participate in these Padlet discussions and exchange ideas and resources with each other. And here we have the extra resources tab. As I mentioned, this is optional. It's entirely up to you how much or how little of the extra resources you delve into, but it is important to remember that you do need to spend some time on reading and independent activities as well as working on your assignments as part of the overall time commitment for the subject. So there are 4 little drop-down menus there. The University of Melbourne book list, a variety of relevant book lists, and often I will highlight the chapters in those books which are particularly relevant. Then a list of general resources for extra learning. That might be things like web pages or NASA articles and so on. A list of videos and a list of journal articles. With the LEGO Education Build to Launch series, which is a collaboration with NASA, and I mean, who doesn't love LEGO? So in the first module, we will be watching 3 videos. The videos tend to go between 10 and 15 minutes each, so they can be a nice little break between other things to watch those. And then stemming from those videos and the learning resources provided by the LEGO Education people, we have a mixture of thought-based activities which we will integrate into our normal tutorials throughout the rest of the year, and design-based activities, which is actually designing something as a collaborative exercise. And there will be 2 specific design-based tutorials in semester 2. Then just a reminder about spin-offs, that it's part of the expectation for each block that you will reflect on spin-offs and write a short reflection in your e-portfolio, which you can then utilise later in the year to select at least 1, hopefully more, specific spin-offs to talk about in your end-of-year e-portfolio presentation. With the mission briefing and debrief, we'll start with an inspirational video, then we will have a foundation block recap, and for this we will get you as allocated to give us a bit of a recap about what you learnt from the previous block. So this will be the case for every block, and you will see the names there of the people who've been allocated, and as far as possible I've tried to line that up with the groups for the group video assignment so that it's not going to take you out of your way to do a little bit of a recap for that. Then we have the breakout room activities to prompt critical and creative thinking, and for this particular tutorial we have 5 key questions which are very much about cardiovascular physiology in space, and you'll see them there on the Canvas site. You will have the opportunity to talk about those in your small groups, and then we will have a discussion in the larger group about the answers to those questions. And then after the tutorial I will post a PDF with the model answers. These activities came from a NASA activity, so I will provide the model answers that the NASA people developed in answer to these. And this is just the detailed list of the 5 questions, and probably the main thing to mention is when you're in your breakout rooms, if you have a look at the top of your Zoom window, you will see which room you are in, and for tutorial purposes that will be your group number. and you'll see that each of the 5 activities have been allocated to a particular group to report back. So even though the idea is that you'll discuss all 5 questions, each group will just report back on one of these topics. And the final thing will be to have a bit of a debrief about the foundation block. So this is your opportunity to give constructive feedback about what you enjoyed, what you didn't like so much, and what you think could be improved. And for the foundation mission, we'd also like to hear your thoughts about the virtual mission. And finally, if you have any general questions, please bring those along as well. And that's the end. Thank you very much.